The impact of losing international talent in U.S. science. Brace yourself. The future of American biomedical research is at a crossroads, and the stakes have never been higher. U.S. science, a field once celebrated globally, is now facing a multifaceted assault that threatens to undermine decades of groundbreaking advancements. One of the most pressing issues is the dramatic reduction in federal funding. Billions of dollars in previously approved grants are either suspended or terminated, with the latest budget proposals dictating harsh cuts: 40% for the National Institutes of Health and 57% for the National Science Foundation. These are not mere numbers. They represent a significant blow to the research infrastructure and the innovative spirit that has long defined the United States. Another distressing development is the rollback of diversity programs, once championed as an engine for academic excellence. Initiatives that included fellowship grants and supplements to support underrepresented groups are being dismantled, leaving many promising trainees in the lurch. But here's where it gets controversial. Not so long ago, explicit commitments to diversity were touted as essential components in grant applications, only to now serve as reasons to cancel awards. This ironic twist not only jeopardizes the career prospects of these individuals, but also signals a broader devaluation of scientific input in critical policymaking at agencies such as the Food and Drug Administration and the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Perhaps even more alarming are the stringent visa restrictions now imposed on international graduate students and postdoctoral researchers. Prestigious institutions like Harvard University has been hit hardest, with a complete ban on new visas and the very real threat of terminating visas for those already enrolled. The situation extends beyond any single institution, as U.S. embassies and consulates have largely halted the visa interview process for prospective applicants, and the grounds for expelling international students have been expanded. While regulatory revisions and legal battles are ongoing, meaning the exact rules may shift between when this was written and when you read it, the combination of these barriers and the fears of deportation or imprisonment is likely to dissuade many talented individuals from pursuing their dreams on U.S. soil. To put this into perspective, consider the experience of a veteran researcher who has mentored international scholars over several decades. Since the early 1980s, from the days at Washington University in St. Louis to a long tenure at Harvard ending in 2024, his laboratory welcomed scholars from 28 different countries. In fact, when filtering out those who were U.S. citizens by birth, there were about 22 countries represented and over 50 foreign-born trainees in total. A review of high-impact papers published by his lab in journals such as Cell, Nature, Nature Neuroscience, Neuron, PNAS, and Science shows that 75% of these studies featured a foreign-born first or co-first author. Moreover, several of these former trainees have become faculty members at some of the nation's top research institutions, including Baylor University, Harvard, MIT, and various campuses of the University of California. Their unique contributions have been integral to the lab's success, underscoring just how critical international talent has been to maintaining the U.S. edge in research. This is not an isolated case. 3 senior colleagues, each with similar backgrounds and experiences, have collectively hosted students and fellows from 43 different countries, ranging from Argentina and Australia to Vietnam and Syria. While the numbers may vary across fields and institutions, the pattern is unmistakable. The loss of international talent not only strips individual labs of innovation, but also threatens to erode the overall leadership of U.S. biomedical research. And this is the part most people miss. The broader implications of these policies extend well beyond immediate research outcomes. Many of the most distinguished figures in U.S. science, think Nobel laureates such as Mario Capecchi, Eric Kandel, Ardem Pataputian, and Thomas Sudhoff are foreign-born scientists who came to America in search of opportunity. Today, foreign-born researchers make up a significant portion of elite institutions and accolades within U.S. science. By restricting international student access, we are effectively cutting off the pipeline that has long fueled American dominance in biotechnology and the economic prosperity that accompanies it. Even more provocatively, these restrictions might have an unintended consequence. They could bolster scientific research in other parts of the world. Historically, the best and brightest from around the globe have flocked to the United States for advanced training. With these barriers in place, many might choose to remain in or even return to their home countries, strengthening research enterprises abroad while leaving American institutions to struggle. As universities in Asia and Europe rapidly close the gap, the U.S. could lose its allure as the inevitable destination for aspiring scientists. In the end, while science itself will undoubtedly continue, the pathway from exceptional research to global technological and economic leadership in the U.S. is at risk of being severely disrupted. Are these policy changes just a temporary setback, a minor bump on the road to recovery? Or do they mark a deeper, more systemic shift that could level the international playing field at the expense of American preeminence? I encourage you to ponder these questions and join the conversation. Do you see these measures as a necessary recalibration of global science, or are they a misguided strategy that will ultimately hinder U.S. innovation? Your thoughts and debates on this issue are more than welcome. Trump's immigration crackdown. How universities' international students are impacted. The landscape of higher education for international students in the U.S. is undergoing significant changes, and it's not all for the better. As President Trump implements stricter immigration policies, international students, including dreamers and those seeking job opportunities post-graduation, find themselves facing mounting challenges. But here's where it gets controversial. These policies are not just affecting the individuals, they're targeting the universities themselves. Dara Lind, a senior fellow at the American Immigration Council, highlights how universities have become prime targets in this immigration crackdown. It certainly struck me that universities kept coming up as a very attractive target. Things that might not be really noticeable for another few years are becoming noticeable just in the scope of a few months, she remarked. Recently, the administration's focus shifted to those benefiting from Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, DACA. This program allows young individuals who enter the U.S. without documentation as children to renew their status biannually, safeguarding them from deportation. However, last week, the Education Department announced investigations into 5 universities that offer scholarship programs for DACA students. The administration argues this practice is unjust to American citizens. As we mark President Trump's historic 6 months back in the White House, we are expanding our enforcement efforts to protect American students and lawful residents from invidious national origin discrimination, stated Craig Traynor, Acting Assistant Secretary for Civil Rights, illustrating the administration's stance on this issue. For prospective foreign students, the visa application process now mandates a social media check, prompting many to cleanse their online profiles of potentially contentious material. This adds a layer of anxiety for those wanting to study in the United States. The past 6 months have been tumultuous for those currently enrolled in U.S. universities. Thousands of students were initially removed from the Student and Exchange Visitor Information System, SEVIS, a critical database for the Department of Homeland Security, before being reinstated following public outcry. Furthermore, several students and faculty members involved in pro-Palestinian protests have faced arrest and deportation risks, with the State Department asserting they pose a threat to American foreign policy. While most have been released, they are still entangled in deportation proceedings. As Stuart Anderson, Executive Director for the National Foundation for American Policy, observes, The administration's crackdown on universities appears strategic. I think they decided to target universities, particularly after the campus protests that happened in the previous year, he explained. He notes that while research funding has been used as leverage against universities, international student policy remains under federal jurisdiction, thus becoming a focus point for the administration. Advocates stress that universities must rise to the occasion and push back against these restrictive policies, despite fears of losing federal funding. We need to leverage all the levers that we have at our disposal, really understanding how we navigate these different, evolving, and complicated immigration policies in a way that continues our compliance with the law while supporting our students, suggested Miriam Feldblum, the president and CEO of the President's Alliance on Higher Education and Immigration. This is about more than just one type of action. It requires a multifaceted approach to address the complex challenges facing campuses and their communities. The White House's response remains unclear, but for international students at prestigious institutions like Harvard and Columbia, the stakes are particularly high. The administration's attempt to revoke Harvard's ability to enroll foreign students was rebuffed by the courts. Yet investigations into the university's compliance with foreign student enrollment persist. Columbia University, on the other hand, announced it would report instances of international student expulsions to the Trump administration to qualify for federal funding, indicating a clear adjustment to its strategies. The administration has already identified universities, especially elite ones, as specific targets in its culture war, going after institutions like Columbia and Harvard, Lind warns, suggesting a deliberate strategy to gain publicity for these confrontations. Furthermore, there are increasing concerns about the fate of programs enabling international students to work in the U.S. for a year after graduation. Anderson points out that if students encounter stringent requirements for extending their visas, it could deter many from choosing the U.S. as their study destination. You would get hundreds or thousands of extensions a year, and if those extensions faced hurdles, it would discourage international students from coming to the United States. How do you see these immigration changes affecting the future of American higher education? Do you agree with the administration's approach to immigration within universities? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Trump versus Harvard. ICE raids systemic crisis with Glenn Carle. FO exclusive. The United States is facing a moment of profound institutional unraveling, and it's happening not just quietly behind closed doors, but in plain sight. From sweeping immigration raids to legal battles involving some of America's most prestigious institutions, the very foundations of American democracy are being tested like never before. But here's where it gets controversial. Some argue these aren't just political moves. They're part of a calculated effort to reshape the nation's power structure entirely. In a recent episode of FO Exclusive, Fair Observer founder, CEO, Editor-in-Chief Atul Singh, and retired CIA officer Glenn Carle dive deep into what they describe as the collapse of long-standing U.S. political norms. They argue that we're witnessing more than just partisan gridlock. We're seeing a full-scale ideological assault on the institutions that have historically defined American governance and society. And this isn't just about policy disagreements. It's about a fundamental shift in how power is wielded and who gets to hold it. Atul opens the conversation by painting a stark picture of American decline. He points to symbolic moments, like a subdued presidential inauguration and unrest in Los Angeles, as signs that the U.S. is beginning to resemble politically unstable developing nations rather than a global superpower. He laments the erosion of core democratic principles such as the rule of law, institutional stability, and merit-based leadership. In their place, he warns, we now see ideological extremism taking root, with both far-left totalitarians and far-right authoritarians pushing the country away from the political center. One of the most striking examples of this erosion is Harvard University, once a global symbol of American excellence and soft power. Atoll highlights a current legal battle that has effectively barred Harvard from admitting new international students, despite its massive $53 billion endowment and long-standing role in attracting global talent. He sees this not as an isolated incident, but as part of a broader crackdown on immigration, one that's being aggressively pursued under former President Donald Trump's sweeping immigration agenda. This campaign, he notes, has empowered Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, to carry out what some are calling the largest mass deportation program in U.S. history. ICE raids have reportedly ignored due process protections and responded to protests with military-style deployments, a rare and alarming escalation in domestic U.S. affairs. Glenn Carle takes this analysis even further, framing these developments not as temporary political turbulence, but as signs of a systemic revolution. He argues that the U.S. is now in the midst of its most profound crisis since the Civil War, but unlike that earlier conflict, today's upheaval is not about preserving the Union. Instead, it's about dismantling the very institutions that have governed American life for over a century. At the heart of this transformation, Glenn identifies two radical ideological projects. Project 2025, which aims to shrink the federal government down to just border control and national defense, and the theory of the unitary executive, a doctrine that would grant the president unchecked power, modeled after authoritarian regimes like China's. Glenn describes the unitary executive theory as literally revolutionary in intent, and traces its intellectual lineage to Carl Schmitt, a legal philosopher who served under Adolf Hitler's Nazi regime. These aren't abstract ideas, he warns. They're being actively translated into policy. The recent deployment of Marines and National Guard troops to California, despite no declared emergency, is cited as a chilling example of this dangerous centralization of military authority. Glenn sees these actions as part of a deliberate effort to dismantle the post-New Deal consensus, sideline multicultural voices, and fundamentally alter the American political order. But the crisis isn't just political, it's deeply cultural and economic as well. Atoll acknowledges that elite institutions like Harvard are not immune to criticism. He condemns their role in stifling free speech and enabling regulatory capture that benefits large corporations. However, he insists that these issues are symptoms of deeper societal fractures, a hollowed-out working class, a growing affordability crisis in education and housing, and a collapsing media ecosystem. He points to a staggering statistic. The ratio of journalists to public relations professionals has shifted from 1 to 2 in 1998 to 1 to 10 today. This imbalance, he argues, has turned political discourse into a constant stream of spin, leaving voters poorly informed and easily manipulated. Glenn adds a racial and cultural dimension to this analysis. He describes a white male elite that is unwilling to accept the demographic and cultural transformation of America, and is instead lashing out in an effort to preserve its dominance. In this context, Harvard becomes more than just a university. It becomes a symbolic enemy, representing everything that is multicultural, intellectual, and global. The result, he warns, is a dangerous shift in what American society considers normal or acceptable. Drawing on French political philosopher Alexis de Tocqueville, Glenn cautions that when every voice carries equal weight but lacks authority or knowledge, democracy risks descending into chaos and majority tyranny. So what does all this mean for the future of American democracy? Are we witnessing the end of an era or the painful birth of a new one? And here's the part most people miss. The real battleground may not be in Washington, but in the cultural and ideological spaces where the future of American identity is being shaped. Do you think these changes represent a necessary correction or a dangerous overreach? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Lee Thompson Kolar, https wiki.com/Lee Thompson Kolar, edited this piece. The views expressed in this article, video, are the author's own, and do not necessarily reflect Fair Observer's editorial policy.